Today's episode is with Talwar.
And increasingly building automations for security workflows using AI. So like tools, I think one I'm working on right now is analyzing. I think this frustrates engineers, this also frustrates security. And I think a lot of the vulnerabilities, the big problem here is that they just stay. They don't ever really get fixed.
You just say that, hey, this vulnerability is more than 9 or this has a very technical explanation. I don't care, right? Unless you tell me exactly the code that I've written.
It will only extend the timeline by 2 months or 3 months or 3 weeks. And those are the risks that you have to accept. So coming in with like alternative solutions as well will really help. I think it's a big red flag that you should always look at. Not necessarily saying it's a security issue, but it's a big red flag when it's only a single maintainer. And there's also like a lot of dependencies that come with AI generated code. I've built a lot of things just for fun on Claude code. Let's say your SBOM for a month ago said version 1.0, and like now you're already upgraded to 2.0, right? Now you're not vulnerable anymore, but the SBOM is outdated. You have to like make the risk trade-off of like what's more important, right? If you do like a point in time test every month, I think generally speaking for most products, that's very sufficient.
Hi everyone, this is Purushottam and thanks for tuning into ScaleToZero Podcast. Today's episode is with Sana Talwar. Sana is a product security engineer at ServiceNow. She's also a speaker and an active educator in the world of cybersecurity. She currently serves on Technovation's associate board and volunteers with various women in security orgs. And beyond her technical work, she's also an active advocate for making cybersecurity and tech more accessible. Thank you so much, Sana, for joining me today in the podcast.
No, thank you so much for having me.
I know that I did a very short intro. Anything you want to add to your journey?
Yeah, no, I think you covered everything. I think security I was very lucky to find it. I knew I wanted to be in security when I was like in high school. So I think around 10th or 11th grade. So it's been very grateful that I'm actually being able to be here now.
It's great to hear that you knew from high school that you want to get into cybersecurity. That's often not the case for most security leaders, right? So I'm glad you had that very clear.
Yeah.
So now that you're in security, before you get into the meat of the episode, what does a day in your life look like?
Yeah, so I think security is very varied and my day-to-day is also very varied. And I love that. So a typical day might include like reviewing security assessments, vendor assessments, or coordinating with pen test firms and engineering teams on when testing should start, what the scoping of a test should look like, and increasingly building automations for security workflows using AI. So like tools, I think one I'm working on right now is analyzing pen test reports to auto-file vulnerabilities. So it kind of removes that manual process. So it's a mix of like risk assessment, stakeholder communication, and increasingly using AI to scale and automate things.
I hope we can cover some of those as part of the podcast today. So
Yeah.
we want to focus on a few things, right? Like practical product security tips, third-party reviews, and AI-driven security risks, which is up in your alley. So let's dive into it. So when it comes to security, we often, let's say, read up on blog posts and we read up about best practices and we say that, yeah, we need to do that. And we try to fit that into our organization, right? And however, it doesn't fit always because each organization and each environment, each setup is a snowflake in a way. So what does a developer-friendly security culture looks like in practice?
Yeah, I think I noticed that problem like even earlier in my career, and that pattern I think is still everywhere, right? Security comes at the end, they test a bunch of things, and they give you like a list of findings, right? Like here is all the places where you messed up, so to speak. I think this frustrates engineers, this also frustrates security, and I think a lot of the vulnerabilities, the big problem here is that they just stay. They don't ever really get fixed. So I think there's like 3 core principles into making a developer-friendly environment. So number 1, I think would be like translating to engineering language, right? So me coming to a development team and being like, you have a critical, SQL injection vulnerability or a CVSS 9.1, right? Like very high scores. That's a bad approach, right? Like those like words sometimes don't mean anything. The score doesn't mean anything. I think like a good or a better approach would be like, hey, this bug that we found lets you like, lets attackers access like customer data with or without authentication. And then I think like engineers really understand like user impact and not just like scores or like high severities and things like that. I think the second principle I would say is like prioritizing on actual risks and not just like severity and scores. So CVSS is very useful, but I think it doesn't like always capture the business context. A good example of this is like, let's say there's like a high critical vulnerability, but it requires you like physical access to a data center versus like a medium vulnerability that, anybody on the internet can exploit. So I think you always have to ask when you're giving findings to developers, like what's the actual exploit scenario? How likely is it? And what's like the business impact of it, right? And then also just in general, making developers, like us more is like automating all the boring parts, right? You can build AI workflows to translate pen test reports into more contextual warnings to developers. You want to auto extract actionable items for context for engineers. Basically, I think like removing the friction from the fixing process can be like what the real shift is.
Uh, we started with a great set of principles.
Thanks.
So I think the three things that you highlighted, right? Those resonate really well, because if you go to your engineering and say that every week you go to them and say that, hey, there are 10 vulnerabilities, 9 and higher, they'll be like, if everything is 9 and higher, do we ignore all of them or do we work on all of them? How do we prioritize that, right? That's when you mentioned about context plays a role, and automate as much as you can so that you have enriched context, which helps the team to understand more about the vulnerability that maybe you are passing in.
Mhm.
And the first thing that you highlighted, like the language, right? If you just say that, hey, this vulnerability is more than 9, or this has a very technical explanation, I don't care, right? Unless you tell me exactly the code that I've written has SQL injection and can get to customer data, I'd
Yeah.
be like, okay, you just told me something technical, it's all right. So with that, you mentioned about friction, right? But these things bring friction. How do you then move beyond some of these without just handing the vulnerabilities? You mentioned about context, maybe you using a language. Any other tips that you have for our audience to apply while maybe talking to their product or engineering team?
Yeah, I think this has been said time and time again. I think security can't just be like a gate at the end, right? It needs to be like a handrail, so to speak, throughout. So security should be involved in planning discussions, understanding the roadmap, understanding like pressures, right? I think development teams and engineering teams have a lot of pressure to, ship functional products, right? And if we make security at the end of it, like they build this entire amazing flow, right? And at the end of it, we come back and be like, actually, you need to fix most of it, right? That is not helping anybody. So helping thinking about security from the beginning, right? Let's say if we know that they're building like a new API, let's talk about authorization from the beginning, rate limiting, input validation. Let's talk about all these features and all these additions we might want to think about in the security context from the beginning. And I truly believe like
Mhm.
nobody wants to write like insecure code, right? Like most development teams are under pressure to ship. So as long as we can make this like the secure path also like the easy path, like clear guidance, good tooling, minimal friction, I think everybody will take it. But if we make security more painful, they'll work around it, and that's way more dangerous. So I don't think like developer friendly security is lowering the bar. I think it's like just making the bar like more visible, reachable, and then like integrated into existing processes.
Makes sense. So, one thing is, often when you work with product or engineering teams, um, you have to, as you highlighted, right, there is possibility of friction, so you can automate, you can tailor the language, you can do all of that, but that also sometimes has a cost, right?
Mhm.
So this is one of the questions that we got from a common friend, Enrique, was asking, like, security often involves a trade-offs between velocity and user experience.
Mhm.
Then when speaking with product teams, how do you navigate those conversations with product and engineering teams? And if you have an example where you had to push back or find some compromise that will help our audience?
Yeah, I think again, kind of like in the business context of things, right? Explaining why a security vulnerability would affect like real life customers or like real life like business deals really make the difference on whether something is going to get fixed or not. I think most of the times when I've received like, feedback of like, hey, this is never going to get fixed. Some of the compromises I can think of is like, I have to come in and be like, I provide solutions, right? Like if A doesn't work, provide B, C, D, right? Like, and talk about timelines as well, right? If we don't do A, we'll do B, but it will only extend the timeline by 2 months or 3 months or 3 weeks. And those are the risks that you have to accept. So coming in with like alternative solutions as well will really help with the velocity. And then there's times where you just need to escalate things. There are times where like you know that this is going to be a problem. You have to bring in your leadership and have that conversation up top, and that's what you have to do.
So that means you have to, like, as a security owner, you have to find that balance, that at what point maybe you are allowing maybe the vulnerability to even go to production, and
Mhm.
at what point you are like, no, it has to be completely blocked, right? So, and use the tools as you highlighted, like use leadership or more different solutions, different approaches, how you can resolve it. But you have to take that call, that where do you put your foot down in a way that, hey, this has to be done, versus you where you are flexible.
Yeah.
um, that's great. Now the question is, like, we spoke about vulnerabilities, right? And nowadays we use a lot of open source libraries, third party code or services. Even in the age of AI, we use a lot of two MCPs and things like that. Now with that, sometimes even the first party code feels like third party. And when you are doing a review, let's say somebody is using an open source library, or somebody is using an MCP, when you are doing that review, what's a red flag? If you are going through, let's say, the documentation of the GitHub repo, or the documentation of the MCP, or a skill, what's a big red flag where you would be like, no, 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 we cannot use it?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of like a fundamental shift with like programming now. I think even when like a developer uses like Copilot or ChatGPT to write like a function, that code is technically like third party in a way, even if they prompted it or they merged it or whatever it is. So I think in like third party vulnerable, like in libraries specifically, some of the red flags that are very obvious are like, are the libraries like maintained, right? Like who's maintaining them, the number of contributors that are there. I think it's a big red flag that you should always look at. Not necessarily saying it's a security issue, but it's a big red flag when it's only a single maintainer, and that's because there's much easier chance of social engineering something. That's the number one red flag, I think. I think you also need to look at any of the PRs coming in on like a GitHub repo, right? Like what are they saying? What is being actually fixed and what actually gets merged? I think that's always interesting. And then like a quick scan of like before you merge something in, right? Just fork the repo and have like even just like a basic security scanner against it and see what your risks are. Um, 9 times out of 10, a lot of the times I've seen like third party libraries, if it's not like a foundation, or like a big company maintaining it, if it's just like crowdsourced, they will have a lot of security vulnerabilities, right?
Mhm.
Most people just write it to make A to like, B to work. But that's like a risk that you just have to understand. So you do a quick scanner against it, you figure out what your risks are, and then you decide whether you accept it or not. And sometimes it's accepted, and that's fine. But you have to really see what you have to do due diligence before merging something.
Yeah, that sounds like a very good practice to apply, right? So when you are using any third party services or third party libraries, I think there is a project, I think OSSF scorecard or something, which looks at these open source libraries and gives a particular score based on how
Mhm.
often PRs are raised or issues are raised, how often they are fixed, maintainability, as you highlighted, right? That it's not like you're using a repository which the last check-in was 3 years ago, right? That means
Yeah.
it's clearly not maintained. So yeah, you have a very good suggestion of following those practices. Do you follow something similar when you review something which is generated internally, or you primarily use that for external third party code or third party reviews?
Yeah, I think internally we should. I think any code that's even AI generated internally should go through like a conducive security review process or comprehensive security review process, no matter how it's generated. You're building a product, and especially if it's like bigger, large scale companies, right? You're shipping it out to like hundreds of thousands of people sometimes. So even if it's AI generated, it doesn't matter. It needs to seem like it came from like a developer. I think some of the red flags that you should look out for in that case is like if a developer can't explain like what is going on in their code, right? If we ask them like why we implemented something a certain way and the quick answer is like the AI suggested it and it worked, I think that's a red flag. I think developers really need to understand what they're shipping and like what they're building. Um, there's also like a lot of with AI generated code unexplained like complexity. I think AI generated code like loves to over engineer problems. So like abstract factories will have for like simple functions will have like what can cause like a lot of technical debt and security holes. And also like AI generated code does not have a lot of like context on data handling, right? Like as a developer that what data is sensitive and how it generally should be stored, but the AI doesn't really know your policies, or it might log, sensitive data or cache credentials or things like that. And it doesn't know what's sensitive in your context. No matter, I don't think it's sophisticated enough to like get there yet. I think it probably will be soon, but not there yet. And there's also like a lot of dependencies that come with AI generated code. I've built a lot of things just for fun on Claude Code, and it will like download a library to use one function of the library. Right? Is it really worth it to have all those, unknown expectations? Like, I think that like, expands your attack surface like dramatically with just, importing library after library. So I think that's really like, I think that's interesting. I think we need to think about it as any AI generated code is like generated from like right now, like a junior developer that you don't trust right now. So you want to review it thoroughly. You want to review it comprehensively. And you have to also account the developer as well, right? Can they intellectually, like, do they intellectually own it? And do they understand it well enough to fix it or debug it, at 3 a.m.?
You touched on a very important point, which is ownership, right? uh, just because you used AI, Claude
Mhm.
Code or ChatGPT, Gemini, or
Yeah.
whichever tool, right, to
Yeah.
generate some code to maybe fix a bug or build a feature, the ownership still lies with you. You cannot just say that, hey, AI generated code and I have no idea what it is. You cannot say
Yeah.
that, right? You own that code now and you have to answer to those questions, which we do even for non AI generated code, right?
Yeah.
Like it goes through the
Mhm.
review. Somebody might say that why we have written it in a particular way versus some other way. So you have to answer to those questions and you have to get those reviewed before it goes to production.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I want to be clear, I'm not anti AI tools. I use them daily. But I think like developers and like security engineers need to like adapt the review process, right? Like everybody needs to understand why they
Mhm.
built something and how to maintain and secure it as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. Sorry if it came out as that I'm anti-AI because I also use AI quite a bit to generate code and things like that. But at the end of the day, I sort of own that code that is
Mhm.
being written uh, by the agent that I'm using, and
Mhm.
I make sure that I understand, and then I ask for thorough review before it goes to production. So yeah, like spot on what you said, right? That use AI as much as you can to generate code or generate specs and all of that. But at the end of the day, you have to understand that deeply
Mhm.
so that you can answer questions or tailor it if there are some review comments and things like that.
Yeah.
So, on the same lines, one of the questions that we have got from Vineet is that when it comes to like third party libraries or things like that, we often obsess on SPOMs.
Mhm.
Uh, but most of the times, if it is a vendor owned product, it's a black box, right, to the security team or the product team or engineering team. When there is a 0 day, then SPOM just tells us that what component is used, but it doesn't tell us whether the vendor has fixed that, mitigated that risk, or if we are exposed or not. In this AI driven world, do you think AI can finally help us with that point in time assessment? How do you see it?
I think a lot of vendors are already doing SBOM assessments. So, generating like providing like a vex to customers, right? Like what's going on with all the vulnerabilities, figuring out the criticals and what is actually affected. So, but even like I think the problem with the SBOM is that even if you have an SBOM, right, and it says like this library is vulnerable on this version, and you're using it, doesn't necessarily mean that you're vulnerable. You might not be using that function in that library, right? Or it's really hard to exactly know from an SBOM what is being vulnerable, or like what is putting you at risk and what's not. So I think doing like SBOM assessments on your
Mhm.
like whatever release cycle that you have, whether it's automated or doing it manually, I think it's really important to get that context. Um, and I think AI
Mhm.
can do a lot of help with that, right? Like let's say your SBOM for a month ago said version 1.0, and like now you're already upgraded to 2.0, right? Now you're not vulnerable anymore, but the SBOM is outdated. So I think AI can be
Mhm.
like really useful in like reviewing your repositories and updating the SBOM. But I do think like
Mhm.
assessments of SBOMs, right, to see like if any of them are actually exploitable is really important.
And yeah, I think again the keyword that you used is exploitable, right? You might use a lot of oh sorry exploitable, and another thing that you highlighted is whether you are actually using them or not. It's
Hmm.
possible that in the library that you're using there are 200 functions, but maybe out of those only you're using 10 which are in
Yeah.
your code flow, and they are not vulnerable, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, like doing that thorough review makes a lot of sense. Now, one follow up question to that is, let's say you highlighted about the upgrade, right? Let's say you initially installed 1.0. Now there is a version of 1.1. Uh, do you, like, as a security person, how do you ensure that 1.1 does is not a malicious update without going through maybe all the changes or all the change logs and the code and everything? How do you ensure that the update that or the upgrade that we are going to do is safe?
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's a difficult problem to solve because you can't review like every line of the new version.
Mhm.
That's not viable. Doesn't scale. And if you could, like, you probably also like anybody would also like lack the expertise to audit everything. Like, I can't personally audit like a crypto library. I don't know. I'm not in depth with that. I think managing those malicious updates or like that risk responsibility is you have to think about it in like layers, like defense in depth, like which is a core cybersecurity principle, right? So in this case, you could think about things like having an SBOM, making sure you know what's going on with this new upgrades. Dependency pinning, right? So never auto updating in production. Always goes through staging first, making sure things are looking good before you push it out to prod. There's a lot of like good automated
Mhm.
scanners that use it that have a lot of good tooling to flag any known vulnerabilities. And then also
Mhm.
just evaluating. I think I mentioned this before, like project health, right? Like what's the active maintenance, contributors, corporate backing? Like what's the deal with the new update? Another thing I think you can look at is like the runtime monitoring of things in terms of like detection and containment, right? Detecting any anomalous behavior, always following least principle, like limit what dependencies can access, whether it's like sandboxing or just like access control measures. And then the easiest one I think is like signature verification, right? Make sure packages, the signature and the checksums match, right? Make sure you're downloading what you think you're downloading.
I think the again in this the key thing that you highlighted is uh, it's not humanly possible, right? For an organization to stay on top of all the third-party libraries you're using, and again all the upgrades those are coming in every single line. The example that you gave of, let's say, crypto library, maybe you are not that familiar with crypto. What about it's written in a language which you don't understand? Like, let's say I don't understand Rust, and I'm
Mhm.
using a Rust package and there is a change. There is no way I can understand what exactly the code change is, whether it's vulnerable or not. That's where, as you highlighted, like doing the using tools
Mhm.
to do some of the scans and automating this as much as possible would give you that visibility that maybe if we upgrade, what are the risks are we agreeing to take,
Yeah.
and maybe then you decide whether you want to move forward or not, right?
Mhm.
Now, one last question on this is, let's
Yeah.
say you are using a library and you see that there is a potential vulnerability, or it's not maybe maintained really well, one of those red flags that you highlighted. But maybe one of your product managers or engineering manager is like, it is solving my problem and I need it. I don't care about what you're saying. So how do you communicate? Like, how do you find balance in that scenario?
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm going to go back to what I previously said about communication. So as I mentioned, like security people speak vulnerabilities, we speak severities, and PMs speak like business outcomes and like timelines. And those are completely like two different conversation. So I could come in and be like, hey, this new library that you're using has like very high critical CVEs attached to them. But that doesn't really mean anything to a PM. Like PMs want to know like what risks are they getting and what are they going to accept. So like a three-part framework that I have for this is, if something is going to be like a compliance blocker, right? Known vulnerabilities in libraries or in anything will fail like SOC 2, for example, right? And if your customers rely on you providing like a clean SOC 2, that's a very easy way to communicate risk. Another thing is like customer trust, right? Like if we know that these are known vulnerabilities that and we didn't fix them and we still use them, that shows negligence and very down the line PR disaster lawsuits that could create like real like actual like very drastic impact to the product. And then there's also like technical debt, right? Is it easier to fix it now or like 2-3 months from now when more code has been integrated and it's like much difficult to migrate and refactor the code to change it? So that could extend timelines on your product development, right? So I think those are the top three things that I think if you can manage your problem within one of those frameworks or one of those principles would really communicate the impact to your PM.
Awesome. Very clear framework or clear set of guidelines that you follow
Yeah.
when interacting with product or engineering team. For sure, that goes a long way, right? One of the questions that Vineet is asking on this topic is, um, how do we perform continuous monitoring for code we don't even own without breaking the speed of modern dev cycles? I think this goes back to what you said earlier, right? That if you're using, let's say, external libraries, you need to have tooling, you need to automate it. But how do you do it in a continuous manner and not impact your maybe deployments or your dev speed? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I think that's a problem that I think everybody faces, right? Like it takes a lot of time and energy and resources in continuous monitoring versus, you do it at a point in time. I don't know if any like tools speak out to me to do this, but you have to like make the risk trade-off of like what's more important, right? If you do like a point in time test every month, I think generally speaking for most products, that's very sufficient. And, like unless there's no need to do continuous monitoring at that point. Or if you want to do it per release, right? Before every release, are you making sure that you're assessing, whatever you're trying to monitor, right? I think it really depends on your business needs and what your customer wants. So continuous monitoring is really good if you have like a large scale setup and you can afford it in terms of resources and the people that would actually be following up with that monitoring. Like what does that actually translate into? But if you have like a small scale operation, right, then doing it by every release or every month or whatever the cadence seems right to you is probably just fine as well.
We spoke about vulnerability, third party, and all of that, and we touched on AI a little bit in between. Let's get into AI. So when it comes to AI tools, uh, security teams can use it for multiple purposes, right? Either to use it to improve the product security itself,
Mhm.
or to improve the product itself, right? So how can let's say if an organization has an early security team, how can they use AI to improve the product security without maybe introducing new set of risks?
Yeah, I think starting small, right? AI is still pretty, if you're like completely new to it, like starting with small, like high constrained use cases would be great. Like good starting points would be like a document analysis, right? If you get pen test reports, SAOs, questionnaires, vendor assessments, right? I think those are really easy for AI to digest and give you back and give you good feedback as well. They're really good at like taking structured info or like giving you unstructured information from like unstructured tests. And that will, eliminate a lot of manual process and create like productivity gains, right? Another like obvious thing that I see is like pattern detection. Like AI can spot like anomalies that humans might miss in high volume environments like logs or like traffic captures, things like that. Um, I think a couple of other things to improve like product capability would be like using AI to help make security more accessible to developers. So, for example, like I was mentioning before, like an AI would explain vulnerability reports in plain English, right? Nobody really needs
Yeah.
to know what's like the technical name for something, right? But like if you translate into plain English and like how to fix it in plain English, right? I think that would be like a great use case for developers. I think another use case could be like suggesting secure code patterns during development, right? Like a security focused like Copilot even. So when like a developer saves like a file that has like a password function, right? And AI can
Mhm.
suggest like consider using bcrypt instead of SHA-256 in your hashing, right? I think those
Yeah.
suggestions could catch a lot of the like the low hanging fruit like vulnerabilities very early on and very easily be able to like fix it very easily. And then threat modeling. I think I haven't ventured into this, but I think threat modeling is, like AI would be like really useful in threat modeling, especially as like the first step, right? So you give it all your architecture documents, you give it all your documentation, and it can give you like a
Mhm.
really good like first page for you to start on, making those architecture decisions, making those changes in your structure from the beginning.
You shared some very good examples of how we can use AI for security, right? I think the first one that you touched on, like pen test reports or vendor security assessment reports. I think I recently read like Treasure Data. They used agents to analyze these reports, and they could get 94%
Yeah.
efficiency in their third-party risk management. So
Mhm.
yeah, it makes a lot of sense to utilize AI to do some of these report analysis and cut down as much of repetitive tasks or
Mhm.
trivial tasks. And then once you get the skimmed down version, then maybe you work on that, right? So that reduces the burden on the security teams more, like reduces more burden from the security teams.
Correct. Yeah. And like, we're not replacing security engineers by any way. I'm a security engineer, so I don't want to be replaced. We're just like multiplying, like you said, like the handling, the repetitive tasks, the documentation type of work. So we can really focus on like the novel threats.
I think that's a touchy topic, that whether AI is replacing
Yeah.
humans or not. Maybe we'll not get into that. But yeah, I understand. Like it helps with a lot of productivity gain, like both from coding perspective or even from day to day work perspective, right? So we are noticing a lot, especially in the security industry. AI is being leveraged in many ways to improve productivity. So yeah, mm, totally agree with your point. Uh, like one of the questions that we have got received from Akanksha on the same topic is, what's your take on AI performing these critical job functions? Let's say reviewing the security posture of the product and applications.
There's like a level of risk management there, right? So you can use like AI is great, efficiency, productivity, all the good stuff, but you have to manage your risk. So something as simple as like I know I shouldn't have to say it, but like never sending sensitive data to public AI services, right? You can't copy and paste your pen test report into like your public chat GPT, right? Or your security. You don't want to send your security
Yeah.
architecture to like a public API. So to like for those, you want to manage your risk, right? You're making sure that you want to use private deployments, enterprise deployments, or like anonymize any data. And I think the big thing here is, especially on critical job functions, you want to use human review. So like AI can suggest things, right? But humans have to pull the trigger and have to decide. In the same sense, like we were talking about like developer ownership, right? You want a security, like you want to own like sensitive action items that you're doing. So you never want to auto file things, right? Just for the sense of it, you don't want to auto response to questionnaires without any validation. So in this case, I think using AI to do the heavy lifting, to gather documentation, to gather your metrics, but the human person, like the engineer, has to make the final call of like what is right, what is wrong, what is being accepted, and what's not. I think that's kind of the gate that you have to keep with AI systems.
I think you mentioned about that not copy pasting maybe your pen test report. I hope that's not the case with folks. It's same with like your code or even architecture document. Anything which is your IP, no one should just copy paste it directly to like the free plan of, let's say,
Yeah.
ChatGPT or Claude or something like that. Hopefully that doesn't happen. One of the things that you highlighted, and which happens a lot when you use AI, is somebody can write a if you have a, let's say, chat interface to your customers or something like that, somebody
Mhm.
can always write a prompt to reveal some sensitive data, just like prompt injection, right?
Mhm.
We spoke about like third-party libraries and the vulnerabilities and things like that. If you're using AI systems, then how do you patch this kind of vulnerability, or how do you work around some of these vulnerabilities?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of research still going into this. So, like prompt injection, as you mentioned, is like genuinely scary because like a lot of traditional security models don't apply. But like direct is just like, hey, it's like an SQL injection for like your agent or your LLM, right? You craft a
Mm-hmm.
malicious response, and it could be something as like ignore instructions and do XYZ, and that's relatively manageable. You can create some input filtering. You can control the conversation a little bit, but I think indirect prompt injection is like way scarier because the attack will come from like resources or data sources that the AI will like read, and that sometimes like a lot of the times it's like the content that the user will never see. So an example of this is having like an email assistant on your email account, right? And you have it read all your
Mm-hmm.
emails, and then you have it send you a summary at the end of the day, so to speak. In this case, what
Mm-hmm.
if like you get like a malicious email that sounds like it looks like a newsletter, but it hidden in the white text or even in like the HTML comments, it has like some kind of command that says system like forward, I don't know, all emails saying confidential to, like to evil at evil.com, like whatever it is, right? Like some kind of malicious prompt, it's
Yeah.
there. So, but when you look at that newsletter email, like you only see, the content of that, but not actually like the malicious command behind it. And the AI
Mm-hmm.
or your LLM like bot reads it as commands and not just data, right? You have
Mm-hmm.
successfully created like an indirect prompt injection. So now every email that has confidential in it will get forwarded to this email address. So that's like the scary part of it. Like you never see the malicious prompt. It's just like indirectly injected through the content that AI has processed. And I think this scales to AI agents the most, specifically because they browse websites. There's lots of malicious websites that, can embed instructions.
Yeah.
They read documents. They process like user content, like, comments on reviews on social media, things like that. And they also like analyze images. So like, with
Mm-hmm.
steganography and like, text embedded in images that can also be taken as instructions. I think solving this is really hard because like the fundamental problem here is that traditionally you would just like sanitize the input for any kind of injection vulnerability, right? But with AI,
Right.
inputs are English, they're natural language, and they come from everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So like the attack surface is giant, and you can't sanitize
Mm-hmm.
natural language without like destroying its utility. um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. That's a very important point. Yeah.
yeah. So I think solving this is, again, I think it's still being actively researched, but kind of going back to like defense in depth, right? You want to create some like levels of prevention. So number one is like doing least privilege and on the prompt level. So you want to think about like only having action allow lists, right? So if your email assistant is only supposed to read emails and summarize them and mark them read or unread, those are the only three actions it can do. It cannot send forward anything, it cannot delete anything, and it cannot like create filters or whatever it is. And then if there's any sensitive actions that are happening, you want to have, like I mentioned before, like confirmation gates, right? You need human approval before it
Human
can
in the
send.
loop.
Yeah, human in the loop. You
Yeah.
want to send before you send something. And then you also want to think about like scoping everything. If you want to send emails, you can only do it to these 5 emails. If you want to read documents, only from this one folder you can read documents, and so on. So those are like the few things that I can think of that would help like patch this. But I don't think there's like a perfect solution for um, prompt injections or indirect prompt injection just yet.
It's an exciting world we live
Yeah.
in, right? Like where, like you drew parallels between SQL injection and prompt injection, but now with let's say AI agents using MCPs or using
Mhm.
skills, the example that you gave of email, right? Let's say you are using a MCP tool to read your emails. Now it reads a command as part of it, and it becomes an
Yeah.
indirect prompt injection, right? You need to solve for that as well. And you're right, like prompt injection, even in OWASP top 10 of LLMs, prompt injection is one of the most cited risks. Um, and with tools going to browsers, like the example again that you gave, right? Like if you allow your, let's say, Claude or your Codex to go to browsers to get some additional details, it might get some malicious prompts from there and just execute it, right?
Yeah.
Now, the you highlighted about least privilege, setting guardrails and boundaries and things like that. One of the questions that Enric asks in the same lines is, uh, with AI integrated across the stack, with agentic AI and all of that, it completely changes how we look at security.
Mhm.
Uh, what new risks should we be paying attention to? What kind of new risks should we be paying attention to?
I think the biggest shift to think about here is like we can't fix all AI vulnerabilities like how we patch code, right? Prompt injection is a really good example of it's like how it is like so inherent to how LLMs work. So security, I think, becomes
Mhm.
more of like resilience rather than like perfection, right? We always want to mitigate risks rather than just like, it's really hard to eliminate that risk altogether. There's not one simple format for you to not have like malicious prompts and bypass your system, right?
Mhm.
So you want to think about resilience and how you mitigate that risk. So we need practices like, like before you deploy LLM or an agent, right? Red teaming it, treating every like, every external input as malicious. You want to validate outputs as rigorously as you validate inputs. I think that's very important. Like we all talk about sanitizing the input, but like in this case, in AI, in like in the AI world of AI, like output generation is also needs to be very closely monitored and sanitized. Um, and then again, like humans need to stay in the loop. We cannot have the LLMs and AIs do all the work for us. Like for sensitive actions and identifying those sensitive actions, there needs to be a human in the loop. Somebody needs to review it just for safety and security. Because AI can be manipulated in ways like we're discovering like a new way every single day. I feel like there's a new attack vector, like a threat every single day. So there's no way for us to catch them all, and the only way we can do it is like building good security principles like from the beginning, and hope hope that it will at the very least maintain that risk.
I think two key things that we that I could gather from the your responses, like you should not think that we can mitigate all the risks that comes
Mhm.
with a LLM, like using LLM for your applications or using agentic AI, using agents. The second part is the basic principles that you need to follow. You cannot skip that. Even though you know that there are risks, you know you have to mitigate most of them, but you cannot forget about basics. You need to do some of those basic principles. And like some of the examples that you gave, like red teaming your agents or doing the output validation, which is often we don't think about that in pre-AI world, right? We just think about input validation, and most importantly, keeping humans in the loop. If there is an elevated action that maybe an agent is taking, we it should go through maybe somebody's review, manually reviewing and approving it before agents just starts taking those actions. So yeah, those are some amazing suggestions, amazing recommendations. I hope our audience would use those when they are building and deploying AI applications. Before I let you go, One last question that I want to ask is, do you have any learning recommendation for our audience? It can be a blog or a book or a podcast or maybe a YouTube channel or Discord, anything that you would recommend.
Yeah, I think for me, it's still relevant. Like the OG security gurus are still relevant. So like Krebs on security and Schneier on security. I think they've been around for so long that they're very reliable, and I really enjoy all the content that they put out. I think there was like a recent article that Schneier on security posted that um, uh, autonomous like drones are being injected by like prompts in like road signs, which is so crazy. But I
Yeah.
think like the traditional, like, Krebs on security and Shire on security are like my top two. I actually have like an Apple shortcut that sends me like a summary of what they have posted in the last like 24 hours. I get like a text message of it every single day. So yeah, I follow those two the most, I think.
Wow. So you have automated even
Yeah.
your learning process. That's
Yeah.
amazing. uh, so yeah, thank you for sharing that. When we publish the episode, we'll add them to the show notes so that our audience can go and they can also learn from the same resources. Thanks, Anna, for the insightful conversation. Here are a few points which stood out for me. The first one is, when engaging with product or engineering, three principles go a long way, like using business language over technical jargons, highlighting actual risk versus all the risks, considering all of them as critical and has to be fixed. And the third one is automating processes to reduce burden on product and engineering team. The second one is, product or engineering teams should engage with security team as early as possible in the STLC process so that it helps avoid difficult conversations right before go live. The last one is, for AI workloads, follow few principles like red teaming of agents, prompt validation, output validation, setting guardrails, and most importantly, have provisions for human in the loop in your daily, like in your life cycle. Thank you. So, with that, we come to the end of the podcast. Thank you so much, Anna. This was like an amazing discussion on all the way from like working using securely the third party libraries to third party applications to AI and the challenges with AI and how do we stay on top of it from a security perspective. So yeah, thank you so much for coming to the podcast and sharing your knowledge.
No, thank you for having me. This was a really fun discussion.
Sounds good. And to our audience, thank you so much for watching. See you in the next episode.